This game, in my opinion, is pretty good, but nothing really to write home about. I was someone who enjoyed Revelations 1 as a portable game, but as a Resident Evil game, it fell extremely flat with all of its jarring tonality changes between all-out action segments and creepy survival horror segments. Luckily, Revelations 2 has a lot more focus and direction and knows more about what it wants to be, but it still has its own large share of problems. Revelations 2 is Resi 6 controls played in something similar to Resi 4. It's much more survival horror than any Resi game since 4 in the sense of its themes and gameplay mechanics. There's no stupid global pandemic and no overdone insane action movie sequences here, just an abandoned experimental island full of infected and rotting dark and scary buildings. I love the idea of being plonked into the middle of fucking nowhere, cut off from civilization while you're constantly tormented and under the mercy of the island's overseer, almost like a demented funhouse, and I'm glad that Capcom has returned to these ideas. Enemies can be fast and strong, ammo appears in little pieces and not too often, your resistance to damage is pretty low, and finding health feels incredible because of how tricky it is to find sometimes. And if you want my recommendation, play the game in survival difficulty because shit will get real in that. It's also great to see a Resi game that rewards you for exploring again with ammo and very useful weapon upgrades, at the expense of putting yourself at huge risks. On PS4, the game looks pretty good and runs at 60 FPS throughout the whole thing. I also completely adored the writing and characters in this game for how self-aware and self-referential it is. It's been just over a decade since a Resident Evil game hasn't actually taken itself stone cold seriously, and all of the memorable, likeable characters, cheesy lines, corny dialogue, and constant throwbacks towards stupid things that happened in the past games are highlighted and celebrated in a wonderfully done way. There's tons of cramped corridors, deathly puzzles, unpredictable moments, and dark rooms, and yes, I'm extremely disappointed that you're still not alone in these games, but if you're gonna have a partner, I think that the partner system in this game approached it best for this kind of game. Not to mention simplifying the inventory system a lot, and not just having the game be an irritating escort mission. Instead of Resi 5, which features a throwaway partner that's more or less identical to the main character, this game instead has both characters put forward their own unique skills that they can put forward into the game in multiple ways for combat or exploration, and it makes co-op play much more dynamic and interesting because of that. One can shoot while the other one finds weak spots or points at invisible enemies. One can enter through small spaces and pick out hidden items while the other upgrades weapons at will. And I also liked how the game is split over two huge gaps in time, so some things you do in one timeline affects the future for certain puzzles. There are some really cool ideas here. Unfortunately, the computer AI is less than impressive, but I never got any unintentional game overs because of them, so that's something at least. However, the AI is not the only off thing that this game has to offer. The shooting in this game sometimes feels much less satisfying and pretty flat in most instances, mostly due to the fact that enemies sometimes don't physically respond to gunshots, which threw me off massively. My main problem with this game though is that it's one of the most uninspired and cookie-cutter games I've ever played in my life. The designs of the monsters are terribly unoriginal, and with the areas you explore, yeah, they're creepy, but some of them look completely identical and have no major personality to help define them. Also, the workbench system for weapons, enemy radar system, stealth segments, crafting system with particular items, upgrading physical attributes. This game is practically a shorter and more watered-down version of The Last of Us. Yes, this game is much more consistent and feels more complete than its predecessor, and it's also great to see a Resident Evil game that doesn't encourage you to shoot absolutely everything on screen. This game can be very tense sometimes. Thank you so much for changing that. But unfortunately, it does nothing to stand out amongst the crowd, and it feels very, very generic because of that. But is it fun? Yes. Is it better than Revelations 1? Yes. Is it better than Resident Evil 6? Vastly. And is it worth a look? I would say so, especially for the decent amount of length for a spin-off game at least, and good amount of game modes for the price. But just don't expect anything to surprise you here, because if you do, you'll just be disappointed with all of the watered down and cookie-cutter aspects to the game and the way that it presents itself.